Menachem Av 5779. It's the 20th of August 2019, and this week, this Shabbat, parashat Eikev. This shall be the reward when you hearken to these ordinances, beginning in Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 12. And this Shabbat is also the Sabbath of the blessing of the new moon, because next week, next Shabbat and Sunday, will be the first and second days, respectively, of Rosh Chodesh Elul, the new month of Elul. Time to recalibrate and prepare ourselves for the fast approaching High Holy Days, Days of Awe. This week's Torah portion of Eikev, we continue in the soliloquy, the last will and testament of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses, before he takes his leave of the people of Israel. That's essentially what the whole essence of the book of Deuteronomy is all about. It's the 5 weeks from the beginning of the month of Shvat until the 7th of Adar, when Moshe left this world. He's exhorting his people, reminding them, teaching them, preparing them as best as possible for entering into the land. Parashat Eikev is so outstanding and remarkable. It begins by speaking about the reward for performing Hashem's commandments. And right away, in verse 13, he refers to the land as Al ha'adama asher nishba la'avotecha latet lach. All these things are going to come to pass. He will love you and bless you and multiply you, bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your land, and all of these things on the land that he swore to your forefathers to give you. And that basically is, the bottom line of everything, that this is the land that Hashem swore to give to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that really, I think, is the key to understanding so much that's going on around us today. Now, the Parsha continues by reminding the people not to fear the nations that are more numerous than they, the nations that were actually occupiers of the land of Israel before it was given to the children of Israel. There were others that were occupying it, and Hashem commands us here to drive them out. And the Parsha speaks about the commandments, various warnings against forgetting Hashem and remembrances. We also find the second paragraph of the Shema prayer, the whole concept of accepting the commandments. And one of the most beautiful aspects of the Torah portion, several times, first of all, the land is referred to as the good land. We read in verse 7 of chapter 8, "For Hashem your God is bringing you to a good land, a land with streams of water, of springs and underground water coming forth in valley and mountain, a land of wheat, barley, grape, fig, and pomegranate." And again, in verse 10, he says, "You will eat and you will be satisfied, and bless Hashem your God for the good land that he gave you." And all of these things are massive codes, actually, for describing in human terms just what the land of Israel really is. It's something that is above our comprehension in some ways. It looks like a land, and here we are, able to be here, the greatest privilege. Moshe was not able to come in, and I don't know how deeply we really even understand, even those that have the wonderful blessing of living here. I don't know how deeply we understand just what it is to be in this land. And one of my favorite verses that we've spoken about probably every year that there's been a temple talk is the verse that says, "A land that Hashem your God seeks out. The eyes of Hashem your God are always upon it, from the beginning of the year to year's end." And that famous question that begs to be asked, what does that mean? The eyes of Hashem are upon this land from the beginning of the year to year's end. Are they not upon every other land in the world? Is Hashem not looking everywhere? Obviously he is. Obviously his eyes are upon everyone and everywhere. But there is a difference between the providence that is visited upon the land of Israel and that which is visited anywhere else, because it is much closer to God's heart, as it were, because it is the land that he chose to rest his presence. And the old analogy that we've used many times about a bottle of CocaCola. Ask everybody in the room, who likes CocaCola? Who loves Coca-Cola? And people are going to raise their hand. Some people maybe won't. But if you ask everybody in the room, who loves your children, then everybody's going to raise their hand. And nobody takes a bottle of Coca-Cola and gives it a big hug and a big sloppy kiss. I hope. I mean, you never know. But they probably don't hug and kiss a bottle of Coca-Cola because they don't look at it the same way.
They don't love a bottle of Coca-Cola as much as they love their children, you're trying to say?
Hopefully.
Okay, that's his reference for later in our conversation.
This is what the verse is saying, that the eyes of Hashem your God are upon this land. And again, the question, but how come it singles out his eyes on this land? Isn't he looking everywhere? Yeah, he's looking everywhere, but it's not the same looking, my friends. That's what the verse is telling us. It's
when you see a parent or a grandparent's eyes when they're looking at their child or grandchild, you see something in their eyes that you don't see when you're looking at a bottle of Coke.
This is what I've always taught about this verse in a gathering, in a lecture. I've always asked everybody, raise your hands if you love Coca-Cola. Some people are sheepish at first; they don't want to admit it. They want to see what everyone else is doing, and they raise their hands high. And then I say, okay, now open up your heart in the deepest way. Now, who loves your child? And then I say, you have to admit, you don't look at a bottle of Coca-Cola the same way you look at your child. That's how Hashem is looking at the land of Israel. And frankly, what all of these verses are instructive in telling us is that this land is the source of blessing for the whole world. And that's really what it's all about. And that's our goal. Our goal is to be plugged into this land through our performance of the commandments, the land that Hashem promised, the land that Hashem swore to our forefathers, and to electrify the land, to bring it to its resonance by performing Hashem's will here. And that creates a state of what is called in Hebrew Zionism, actually. The word Zion comes from the word excellence. It creates a state of balance and excellence and blessing, Shefa, for the whole world. And it's only natural, therefore, that the powers of evil in this world are going to be against this land because it's this way or that way. Mm-hmm. That's exactly the way it is. And that's the only way to understand anything, what of the disproportionate amount of disparaging and attack and de-legitimization and demonization that this land and its government and those who dwell upon it and the Jewish people in general are always getting. It's because of everything, of the potentially that this land can bring and does bring to the world. And all this, the background, as we sail through these waning days of the month of the Consoling Father and prepare to greet the awesome, unbelievable, amazing time of Elul, of Ani L'Dodi L'Dodi, I'm to my beloved and my beloved is to me. The time of the King is in the field, coming up to prepare us for the days of awe, the days of judgment. And here we are reading these Torah portions. And we must relate to a major story that's reverberating now in the media, which I really don't like to so much to get involved in these things, but I think we have no choice because this story needs a response, and it is so much a part of everything that I just said, so much a part of the sanctity of the land of Israel, and an attack on the sanctity of the land of Israel and everything that it represents, and the attempt that is constantly being waged by forces of evil to totally destroy, frankly, the state of Israel. And frankly, I'm referring to the unbelievable fallout that's been generated by Israel's banning of the two freshman Democratic United States representatives, Ilhan Omar of Minnesota and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, to enter into Israel. Ostensibly, it was supposed to be some sort of fact-finding mission, but actually, their whole the purpose of their whole trip was basically to propone and to carry high the banner of the movement known as BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, which is a movement against the Jewish state. These two women are not peacemakers. Their whole goal in coming to Israel was to confirm their own negative attitudes and biases against Israel and their own agenda.
And more than that, to instigate and to create scenes, to create media-friendly scenes that would make Israel look bad. They were going to be here for 3 weeks, and I'm sure every day of their time here, they were going to engage in one episode or another of some kind of street theater in order to make Israel look bad.
And for them, it was a win-win situation, and for us in Israel, it was a lose-lose situation because of this tremendous negative fallout and everybody talking about. But in any event, again, so who are these women? These are two lawmakers who are, by the way, the first two Muslim women ever elected to Congress. And that may or may not have anything to do with the fact that they hate Israel so much, and they hate the Jewish people so much. And there is a law that Israel passed in 2017 denying entry to any supporters of the boycott movement, because the boycott movement is all about destroying the state of Israel. And the fact is that these two women are not just United States lawmakers. They have a well-documented history of unbelievable anti-Semitic comments, anti-Semitic social media posts, anti-Semitic relationships. They hang out with people from Hezbollah and Hamas, which have been designated as terrorist organizations. They have made incredibly anti-Semitic comments about American Jewry altogether, and about Israel, and Israel has the right to prevent people who want to destroy it from entering the country. So the situation became more and more exacerbated because President Trump tweeted his opinion that Israel should not let them in, and therefore it's widely assumed by many pundits and by many in the media that the reason that Israel denied them entry is because of Trump, because President Trump said that we shouldn't, and if we did, it would show a sign of weakness. I don't think it has anything to do whatsoever with President Trump's recommendation, as it were, that Israel should not let them in. There are many critics of the decision. There are many that feel that Netanyahu's decision not to let them in is driving a wedge into bipartisan support for Israel, and it's threatening to undermine ties.
Wait, you have these two Democratic congresswomen who, almost on a daily basis, I don't know if they do anything for their constituencies, by the way, in Minnesota or Michigan. I don't know if they've done a thing for them, but daily they are denigrating Israel, demonizing Israel.
As far as I can see, the entire reason that they wanted to be elected was so that from within the structure of the United States lawmaking apparatus, they would be able
Rashida Tlaib, when she got elected, she said she's a very proud Palestinian.
She
this is
wore
a big
Palestinian
victory
dress.
for Palestine.
Her whole point was,
my point is that, I think I forgot my point. My point is that their whole agenda is against Israel and very anti-Semitic, and everybody is aware of that, and everybody has agreed to that and accepted that. Yet the Democratic Party refuses to condemn them. So Israel is now driving a wedge between Israel and the Democratic Party.
This is the woman who said it's all about the Benjamin's baby. That was Omar, and then
Israel's hypnotized the world.
And talking about
Rashid said that
the dual loyalty of American Jews.
Rashida said that the Holocaust gives her comfort.
Yes, and how the Palestinians gave safe haven to the Jews from the Holocaust. But before the Holocaust, in 1929, of course, we had the horrible massacre in Hebron and every other atrocity that's been committed. The point is, a democracy has the right to protect itself from enemies, and these people are known supporters of the BDS movement against Israel. The BDS movement is all about destroying Israel. And by the way, what was it that they said at their press conference? That Israel has been occupying for 70 years. For 70 years, 71 years is the age of Israel. But the age of the so-called occupied territories is only since 1967. So therefore, her point being that Israel altogether is illegitimate. It has nothing to do with the so-called West Bank. It has to do with, and BDS itself is ostensibly about dismantling military presence in the West Bank, but its real aim is to delegitimize the state altogether and wipe it off the map. And here we see that quite blatantly, because she's talking about how Israel has been occupying for 70 years. And I don't even understand this whole canard about occupation. I mean, they wanted to go to the Palestinian Authority administered territories. We're not occupying them there. We're not occupying them in Gaza. So we're damned if we do in either way, because we're not even having anything to do with them. So what are we occupying? Unless she's talking about Israel within the 1967 borders, which she feels that we're also occupying, like Geraldo Rivera, the great humanitarian expert, wonderful man, said that it's all stolen land, that we stole this land. But that's why I began today's broadcast with the verses from Parshat Eikev, from the book of Deuteronomy, because Hashem says he swore it to the Jewish people. So what exactly do you want from me? The point is, they're talking about the expansion of settlements in Palestinian land. They're talking about ensuring the full rights for Palestinians, and the goal is to destroy Israel altogether. And yes, the Democratic Party, rather than censure these women, the Democratic Party, which has become the beating heart of Jew hatred blatantly, it is now talking about finding ways of punishing Israel. Like, Israel deserves to be punished. Although, for example, in 2012, President Obama denied entry to the United States of an Israeli Knesset member who he deemed to be without redeeming social value. So people do that. I mean, nobody questioned America's right to exist when President Obama denied right of entry to America to an Israeli Knesset member. And by the way, American senators and congressmen are constantly coming. I personally have had the privilege of accompanying many to the Temple Mount.
I think 41 senators and congressmen came from both parties just 2 weeks ago, and certainly they were invited to join them, but they wanted to stage their own little scene. Besides which, Ilhan Omar said that Israel is just like Trump, she always has to stick Trump in it as well, is enforcing a ban on Muslims. Which is insane. Because first of all, there's a million and a half Muslims living who are citizens of Israel with complete rights.
They're not just citizens. They're judges on the Supreme Court. And for her to have the audacity to refer to Israel as an apartheid state, when there are Muslim judges on the Supreme Court, there are Muslim doctors in all the hospitals, it's so absolutely ludicrous.
70,000 Muslims as tourists, visited Israel last year, even from countries that don't recognize or that are at war with Israel. In fact, Keith Ellison, who was a congressman, now he's the Attorney General of Minnesota, I think, a Muslim, who's not a supporter of Israel, has made many trips to Israel. They were not banned because they're Muslims. They were not banned because they don't support Israel. They're banned because they work actively to destroy Israel. They happen to be
Muslims, and they happen to hate Israel and the Jewish people. And so what they've done is they've singled out the only democracy in the Middle East, and yes, it is the only democracy in the Middle East, in such a hypocritical way. They claim to be concerned about human rights. If they're so concerned about human rights, they should have gone to Gaza, where a woman can't run for political office, and where the Christian population is being decimated, and everything else.
They want to go to Bethlehem, where the Christian population has been decimated.
They could
go as far as Gaza.
They could go to Jordan, where 75% of the population is so-called Palestinian. They're not even allowed to vote. But they chose the Jewish state because their motive is only one thing, and that is anti-Semitism. And they call it anti-Israelism because everybody knows that is the way to go now when it comes to anti-Semitism.
You can be pretty openly anti-Semitic now as well. Now, you mentioned before the apple in God's eye. You mentioned that God has his eyes on Israel, and the Coca-Cola metaphor. I thought that was very appropriate because Rashida was emoting about her Siti, her beloved grandma who lives, and it might be the last time she can ever see her grandma, and so much her grandma just wants to pick figs with her.
She wanted to do two things at once. While she was coming to try to destroy Israel, she also wanted to visit her 90-year-old grandma.
So Israel, after banning them, Israel said, if you come to visit your grandmother and do not participate in
Right.
in anti-Israel activities during the time you're visiting your
She
grandmother.
made a
You're
separate
more than
request. She
welcome.
asked permission to visit her 90-year-old grandmother on
And
humanitarian
Israel
grounds. Israel
granted it.
immediately agreed with only one condition: don't harm our citizens while you're here. Meaning, don't promote boycotts against the Jewish state while you're in the country. And then the truth came out, her true agenda, because
She loves Coca-Cola more than her
yes,
grandma.
as it's been pointed out, she hates the Jews and Israel more than she loves her grandmother, because she said no. The conditions were humiliating. What was humiliating? The fact that she would have to agree not to want to destroy Israel,
Right.
and so she's not going to visit her grandmother. When did she last visit her, by the way? I don't know, but she decided not to visit her, and her grandmother pulled down a pulsa d'onora on Trump.
Yeah.
May God ruin you. It's all his fault. That's okay, whoever's fault it is, but she sure hates the Jewish people. In the meantime, she rejected the offer to visit. That shows her evil intentions. And then what do they do? They go and they make a press conference where they're playing the victim. They're always playing the victim, right? And then they post an anti-Semitic cartoon by Brazilian Lebanese cartoonist Carlos Latouf, who, yes, they posted their choice in expressing themselves in their response to being barred from Israel was that they posted a cartoon by a cartoonist who participated in Iran's annual Holocaust cartoon contest in 2006. So tell me, is this rocket science? Do we need to try to guess what these two were up to, or do we see that their true intention was to try to destroy Israel? They are denying Israel's very right to exist. In the meantime, over this weekend, what are the reports? The very, very time that everyone is so critical how horrible Israel is because we didn't let in these two people that want to destroy Israel. First, there's a car ramming near Elazar in the Gush Etzion carried out by a 26-year-old terrorist from Bethlehem. Then there's continued attempts to destroy Israel for 2 straight days. On Friday, terrorists in the Gaza Strip fired at least 1 rocket into Israel. And on Saturday night, terrorists fired 3 rockets at southern Israel. On Saturday night, 3 armed Palestinians who attempted to infiltrate southern Israel were killed by the IDF. Arson terror in northern Israel, arson balloon fire in Sdot Negev. Police thwarted a stabbing in northern Israel. All these things are going on, and their whole thing is that Israel has no right to exist altogether, right? There's how many people? 63 people were killed at a wedding in Afghanistan, and 182 wounded by ISIS, and their target were Shia Muslims, and nobody's talking about it. The whole world is quiet about that, and instead, again, Israel has to be demonized. There's the music. Stay with us. It gets even better.
Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven with Rabbi Chaim Richman here in Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 19th day of the month of Av, 5779, 20th of August, 2019. This coming Shabbat is parashat Eikev. And it will be because you will heed these ordinances and keep them and perform them, that Hashem, your God, will keep for you the covenant and the kindness that he swore to your forefathers. What do you say, Rabbi? It's chapter 7, verse 12, I believe, in the book of Deuteronomy.
Parashat Eikev begins in chapter 7 and verse 12.
And this coming Shabbat is also Shabbat Mevarchin, the Shabbat in which we bless the upcoming new month of Elul, which will actually begin on the following Shabbat, correct?
Shabbat and Sunday.
And Sunday, a 2-day Rosh Chodesh of Elul. That amazing month. The prosdor, what do we call it? Corridor between the
rest of the year, the last month of the year, basically.
Between now and Rosh Hashanah.
Forever.
And the whole cycle of holidays which begin in the month of Tishrei. We've been talking about Parashat Eikev, God's promise to Israel of this wonderful land that he swore to our forefathers that he would give to their children forever. All we have to do to keep up our end of the bargain is to keep the commandments here in the land of Israel. And of course, not just keep them, but as we'll learn further on, I believe in the book of Deuteronomy, not just keep them, but keep them with all our hearts and with love and with joy and enthusiasm, which is hopefully what we're doing today here in the land of Israel. And we mentioned also, it segued into the current events about the two congresswomen.
Mention it, we've been haranguing it.
Yes, and I think, Rabbi, you wanted to just close with a few more things.
It's just that, it's so incredibly frustrating, the floodgates of criticism that have opened up on Israel, as if we have something to hide, as if we have something to be cagey about, and that's why we didn't want them to come to see. And that's not it at all. It's that they were coming specifically to... In fact, they weren't even planning on coming to Israel. I'll tell you what I mean by that. They were planning on coming to Palestine, which is a country that doesn't even exist.
And the trip was organized by an organization that spread blood libels against Jews.
Here's a prepared statement that was given over by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And it reads as follows: "No country in the world respects America and the American Congress more than the State of Israel. As a free and vibrant democracy, Israel is open to critics and criticism, with one exception. Israeli law prohibits the entry into Israel of those who call for and work to impose boycotts on Israel, as do other democracies that prohibit the entry of people who seek to harm the country. In fact, in the past, the U.S. did this to an Israeli member of Knesset, as well as to other public figures from around the world. Congresswomen Tlaib and Omar are leading activists in promoting the legislation of boycotts against Israel in the American Congress. Only a few days ago, we received their itinerary for their visit to Israel, which revealed that they planned a visit whose sole objective is to strengthen the boycott against us and deny Israel's legitimacy. For instance, they listed the destination of their trip as Palestine and not Israel. And unlike all Democratic and Republican members of Congress who have visited Israel, they did not request to meet any Israeli officials, either from the government or the opposition." End quote for a moment. But they did plan on meeting with some Israelis who are internal enemies of the State of Israel, some leftists and propagandists who themselves call for the destruction of Israel. Those were the people that they were planning on meeting with. Continuing the quotation from Prime Minister Netanyahu, "A week ago, Israel warmly welcomed some 70 Democratic and Republican members of Congress who expressed broad bipartisan support for Israel, which was also demonstrated a month ago in a resounding bipartisan vote against BDS in Congress. However, the itinerary of the two congresswomen reveals that the sole purpose of their visit is to harm Israel and increase incitement against it. In addition, the organization that's funding their trip is MIFTA, which is an avid supporter of BDS, and among whose members are those who have expressed support for terrorism against Israel. Therefore, the Minister of the Interior has decided not to allow the visit, and I, as Prime Minister, support his decision. Nonetheless, if Congresswoman Tlaib submits a humanitarian request to visit her relatives, the Minister of Interior has announced that he will consider her request on the condition that she pledges not to act to promote boycotts against Israel during her visit." That's exactly, end quote, that's exactly what happened. She did submit that. It was immediately granted, but then she backed down and she said she's not interested anyway. And then she got on stage and started crying about her grandmother, and she remembers the fear of seeing roadblocks and how her grandmother has to go through humiliation of IDF checkpoints. But as many bloggers and posters have pointed out, those IDF checkpoints are what prevents murderous terrorists from entering into the land, into the country, between the borders, and killing us. And every time, I remember in the days of John Kerry, may his name be obliterated, every time a roadblock, America demanded that we remove a roadblock, right afterwards we would have a murder in that area.
You mentioned bloggers who stated what you just said. She also mentioned, very pointedly, that her Siti, her grandmother, is also an American citizen. Frimit Roth, who lost her daughter in a Palestinian terror attack during the Second Intifada. And she said, those roadblocks were there because of terror, and my daughter, who was an American citizen, would be alive today if they had roadblocks back in those days. Those roadblocks didn't come out of nowhere. They are there to prevent terror. And it's just total exploitation.
It's not BDS, it's BS. It's all part of this incredible act.
That's a teaser.
It's all it's all planned, pre-planned, and choreographed, and it's all just a bashing Israel fest. That's what they planned. Again, these are the women that espouse the most horrific anti-Semitism out of their mouths about all Jews, not just about Israel.
And they're
and about American Jews.
Devotees of P.T. Barnum, who said there's a sucker born every day, and they are playing a lot of people for suckers.
And again, it's all a reflection on the shambles that is the Democratic Party and what it represents today, which is blatant anti-Semitism. That's really what when Trump says that, everybody says he's the racist, he's the problem. But when he points that out, but we don't really need President Trump to point these things out because we see it ourselves. It's true. It's got nothing to do with him whatsoever. It's got to do with the agenda of these people to de-legitimize, demonize, isolate, destroy Israel every way they can. That's what this trip was all about. And thank God they did not come. I am so happy that they did not come. I think it's wonderful. I think we finally chose to do something right and to stand up to the world and say, just if you don't like it, whatever. Who cares? Who cares what you think? Like, we don't have the right to defend ourselves, to defend our borders, to defend ourselves against people who say that we have no right to exist. What would you do, America? What would you do if foreign lawmakers forget about aid, forget about allies, forget about anything? Because what does it really mean when you see that the agenda is to destroy you? Well, what happens if other government representatives of other governments were coming to America with the sole purpose of stating that America has no right to exist? What would you do about it? That's what this is all about.
That's what it's all about. Meanwhile, back here in the land of Israel.
Meanwhile, as we continue throughout the saga of the book of Devarim, we are going to see, I believe next week in Parshat Re'eh, that the concept of the Holy Temple begins to emerge. Mm-hmm. The concept of the place that Hashem chooses to rest His presence. This, after all, is called Temple Talk. And it's because our whole goal is to rebuild the Holy Temple, the house of prayer for all people. Even Omar and Tlaib could come to the Holy Temple. Of course, now when we go to visit the Temple Mount, we as Jews are not allowed to pray. But if the temple was standing, everybody would be allowed to pray. Mm-hmm. Little irony there. But the whole goal of everything that we are learning about is for the children of Israel to enter into the land and to create a vessel for Hashem's presence to shine forth to all humanity. So last week we were talking about the unbelievable experience of ascending the Temple Mount on Tisha B'Av. We talked about the 1,729 Jews who ascended. We talked about the masses, hordes of Muslim rioters that we had to face off with, and the incomparable dedication of the Israel police in separating between us and trying to allow for a Jewish presence on the Temple Mount on that most important day, the day of the destruction of the temple. And we talked all about that. And it was quite a hairy experience, quite a hair-raising experience, quite an eye-opening experience to see the hatred and the utter inhumanity in the eyes of those that were basically calling for our blood because we were coming to the Temple Mount for no other reason than to be seen there by God and to offer a quiet, peaceful prayer. Again, on the backdrop of this week's Torah portion of Parshat Eikev and the promise that the God of Israel made regarding this land and the preciousness of this land and the perfection of this land and the inexorable bond between the Jewish people and this land, which is not up to negotiations, which has nothing to do with demonization or BDS or de-legitimization, because it's ours, and it's not about occupying, because you can't occupy a land that's yours, right? In other words, The Muslims built their structures on the Temple Mount, and they call us occupiers, right? So, talking about this whole connection of what it means to be able to visit the Temple Mount and what it means for us to be in the land of Israel. You know that the Jordanian Waqf, which is the Muslim trust that we allow to autonomy to govern over the daily affairs of the Temple Mount, that body is controlled by Jordan. You know that Israel and Jordan have a peace treaty, and the reaction of the Kingdom of Jordan to the events on the Temple Mount on Tisha B'Av are very, very telling as well. First thing that happened was that Jordan expressed. Jordan's foreign minister met with EU ambassadors, and Jordan's foreign minister called on the international community to pressure Israel to stop what he called violations, quote, violations against Al-Aqsa. And the violations that he's referring to basically, apparently, were the fact that the Israel police needed to exercise restraint and employ anti-riot measures so that they wouldn't be killed, and to ensure the possibility that non-Muslims could also ascend the Temple Mount. But Safadi, Jordan's foreign minister, he warned against grave consequences of Israeli unilateral steps intended to change the historical and legal status of Jerusalem. This is what they're always saying. Right. The historical status of Jerusalem is that it's Jewish. Mm-hmm. The legal status is that Israel declared it to be its capital. But he goes on as saying Israel must respect the historical and legal status quo in Jerusalem and its Muslim and Christian holy sites and stop breaching its obligations as an occupying power. What does this even mean? First they summoned the Israeli ambassador to Jordan for a meeting. And during that meeting, it was explained to the Israeli ambassador to Jordan that Jordan condemns Israeli activity at Al-Aqsa Mosque and on the Temple Mount and demands the activity cease immediately. And Jordan has taken issue with Israeli police defending themselves from terrorists who attacked them on the Temple Mount during Eid al-Adha, as well as Israeli police using riot dispersal methods to disperse hundreds of Muslim worshippers violently rioting on Tisha B'Av. So, according to Jordan, Israel's actions on the Temple Mount deepen the conflict and violate international law. And by the way, Jordan was also very unhappy that Internal Security Minister Gilad Erdan, who we really like, last week he came out and said, it's time for Jews to be permitted to pray on the Temple Mount, and that the current status quo is wrong. Anyway, then the next step was that the Jordanian Parliament recommended that the Israeli ambassador be expelled from the state, and that the Jordanian ambassador should be recalled, Jordanian ambassador to Israel, because of Israel's handling of Muslim violence on the Temple Mount. But then the next stage, third stage, is that Jordan is actually calling now for a reconsideration of the peace treaty altogether. Mm-hmm. Jordanian Parliament recommends mutual removal of Israeli-Jordanian ambassadors. The Jordanian Parliament has recommended that the Jordanian government re-examine its peace treaty with Israel, Sky News reported Monday. According to the report, Jordan's Parliament recommended the country expel Israel's ambassador, recall the Jordanian ambassador to Israel, and re-examine the peace agreement between the two countries because of, again, Israeli activity at Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, violations of international law. And again, these violations are none other than allowing Jews
human
to
rights.
ascend. Basic human rights, which is like our heroes, Omar and Tlaib. This is their whole banner, is human rights. And it doesn't apply to Israel, and it doesn't apply to Jews. Right? Israel is an apartheid state. Yeah, I'll tell you why it's an apartheid state. Because the only place that Jews can't pray is in the only place where we should be praying, the only place where we're commanded to pray, our holiest place in the world, the Temple Mount, the place where we are supposed to pray, where we always have prayed. So yeah, it is apartheid for sure. And this is just another example of the total skewed reality and the lies and the miscarriage of justice and the deliberate portrayal of Israel as the villain.
And the Jordanians are protesting, referring to Israel is breaking the status quo, this holy status quo, which is violated on a daily basis by the Waqf.
And by the way, when they built when they built up and they reopened the Mercy Gate compound, Shar HaRachamim, and they started using that again, that was a violation of the status quo, because there was not supposed to be any mosque there.
Right. So they are daily violating the status quo. They have zero respect for the status quo.
Systematically destroyed tens of thousands of tons of relics from the bowels of the earth of the Temple Mount. That was also breaking the status quo.
If you want to go back to the status quo, the original intent of Israel, not that even I agree with this, but the original intent was to give the Waqf control over the Muslim facilities on the Mount, meaning the mosque, the dome. Now, since then, they keep expanding their mosques and they declare the entire Mount as a mosque, which in their eyes justifies their having complete control of the Mount.
Justifies their occupation.
Their occupation, right. They are definitely occupying. As they occupy holy sites of other religions all over the world.
And because it's a tenet of Islam, is that when a place is conquered in the name of Islam, then you cannot ever relinquish it back again.
Right. So
it's a principle.
It's an Islamic problem. It's really not our problem. It's an Islamic problem. They got to deal with it. The Temple Mount belongs to us, and obviously, every Jew in the world, every person in the world should have the right to pray on the Temple Mount.
Every person. That's again the whole irony. When you look at the prophecies of Isaiah about the whole world flowing there and saying, "We heard God is with you. Can we come with you? And my house shall be called the house of prayer for all people." It's supposed to be the gateway to heaven for all prayer, and the violent, militant, hateful stance that they have against any prayer whatsoever. And look what happened. We spoke about a few weeks ago about a group of Israelis that were hassled and abused in Jordan. They went to Aaron's tomb, the tomb of Aaron the high priest, on the day of his passing on Rosh Chodesh Av, it was, right? And how they were detained because they were singing. They were detained because they were singing. Their religious items were confiscated, kippot, tzitzit, tefillin. And then they were told, it doesn't even matter if you're standing somewhere in the middle of the desert in Jordan and there's nobody around, you're not allowed to pray. Right. So they have this attitude about other people's prayer. Again, this is the religion of peace. This is the religion of Omar and Tlaib. This is peace, love, dope. This is God's gift to...
The 94 peace treaty between Israel and Jordan states specifically that the agreement is that both sides will defend the right of all religions to practice their religion and to pray in their holy sites. So every day, Jordan is violating this treaty.
It's one big lie.
You know what? Omar and Tlaib can go to Jordan and stage as many scenes as they want in Jordan, as far as I'm concerned.
That's not their problem. Their problem is that Israel exists. That's the problem.
Jordan's problem is Israel exists, which is ironic because without Israel's diplomatic and intelligence and military backing of Jordan, water
and medicine
and gas,
and agriculture,
they would not survive a day.
And security, because it's really Israel that's keeping this minority tribal king, keeping him propped up.
Right. So he's playing with fire. He plays with fire.
I think this is all Torah. This is the truth of Torah. This is the truth of the bond between the land of Israel and the people of Israel and the God of Israel and the Torah of Israel. That's really all we've been talking about in this whole broadcast. And it's not a coincidence that all of this is dominating world news now as we're reading these Torah portions that speak of Hashem's promise to the children of Israel and that speak of the preeminence of the land of Israel and our connection to it. It's not unusual that the opposing forces should be trying to uproot this very concept. And I am so glad that those two witches did not come. I'm so glad that we did the right thing. And again, it has got nothing to do with anti-Americanism, God forbid, or not wanting criticism. It has to do with a self-respecting country and government being able to say, you're wanting to destroy us? You think we have no legitimate right to be here? So no, thanks. Find another fool.
There's no reason for us to give them a stage here in Israel.
And speaking of fools, I'll just push the envelope. Speaking of fools, and ask American Jewry, why are they involved? Why they consider Israel such a political liability that they have to bend over backwards to agree with these people? Why do they have to be so enmeshed in this horrific monster that the Democratic Party is, that is so anti-Israel, that is so anti-Jewish, that shows such total contempt and hatred for the Jewish people? Ask yourselves.
So then my advice to the American Jewry and to everybody is to read this week's Parsha, Eikev, and find the truth, find out the truth, and land belongs to Israel. That's the truth. That's the whole story. Thanks for being with us. Temple Talk.